Alright, so this happened a couple of years ago, but it's still something that creeps me out every time I think about it. It was one of those normal, uneventful days that you don't expect to end in a story worth telling, let alone one that you'd be recounting as a creepy experience. But here we are. I was heading back home after visiting a friend who lived a couple of towns over. We had spent the day just hanging out, nothing too exciting, but it was nice to catch up. By the time I left his place, it was already late evening, and I had to take the last train back to my town. The station was practically deserted when I got there, and it had this eerie vibe that I didn't like. You know that feeling when everything's just too quiet? Yeah, it was that kind of night. The train finally pulled in, and I got on. It was one of those older trains, the ones that creak and groan like they've been around since forever, the kind that makes you wonder how they're still running. Anyway, I found an empty seat in a nearly empty carriage and settled in. There were only a couple of other people in the car, a middle-aged guy reading a newspaper and a young woman typing away on her laptop. I figured it was just going to be a quiet, uneventful ride home, or so I thought. We had been moving for about 10 minutes when the train started to slow down. I glanced out the window, expecting to see a station coming up, but there was nothing, just darkness outside. The train came to a stop, and at first I thought it was just a regular pause. You know how sometimes they stop for signals or whatever? But then it just stayed there, not moving. I looked around, trying to see if anyone else was as confused as I was. The guy with the newspaper didn't seem to notice, or he didn't care. The woman with the laptop looked up briefly, but then went back to typing. I was starting to get this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach, like something wasn't right. A minute passed, then another, and still nothing. No announcements, no signs of the train starting up again. I was about to get up and see if I could find a conductor or someone when the lights flickered. Not the usual flicker you see on old trains, but a full-on blackout for a few seconds. It was pitch dark, and for those few seconds, I felt my heart skip a beat. The lights came back on, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I glanced at the other passengers, but they still seemed pretty calm. The guy had put his newspaper down and was just staring out the window, and the woman was now looking around like she was trying to figure out what was going on. And then the weirdest thing happened. The train doors opened. Now, we weren't at a station or anything, just in the middle of nowhere. It was pitch black outside, but I could see the faint outline of trees and some kind of overgrown brush. The doors just stayed open, and this cold breeze started blowing in, sending a chill down my spine. I was frozen in my seat, trying to process what was happening. I mean, why would the doors open in the middle of the tracks like that? And why wasn't anyone doing anything about it? I looked over at the guy with the newspaper, and he was still staring out the open door, not moving. The woman with the laptop had closed it now and was clutching it to her chest, looking just as confused as I felt. Minutes passed, and the doors stayed open. The cold air kept blowing in, and it felt like the temperature in the car had dropped by a good 10 degrees. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I got up and slowly made my way to the door, half expecting someone to stop me, but no one did. I peered out into the darkness, trying to see anything, but it was just black. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, and every now and then I thought I heard something else, something like footsteps, but they were distant, like they were coming from somewhere far away, yet somehow close at the same time. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's what it felt like. I was about to step back when I heard it, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down my spine. It was almost like a growl, but not quite. More like something was out there, just beyond the trees, watching us. I turned back to the other passengers, hoping someone else had heard it too, but they were just sitting there, staring straight ahead like they were in some kind of trance. That's when I saw him. A man was standing at the far end of the carriage, near the last set of doors. I hadn't noticed him before, but there he was, just standing there, staring right at me. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark coat and a hat that cast a shadow over his face. I couldn't make out his features, but I could feel his eyes on me, and it was like ice running through my veins. I don't know how long we stood there, just staring at each other, but it felt like an eternity. I wanted to move, to do something, but I was frozen in place. Finally, he started to walk towards me, slowly, deliberately, like he was in no rush. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel the malice in his gaze, like he was daring me to move. My mind was racing. What the hell was happening? Who was this guy, and why was he on this train? I glanced at the other passengers, hoping they would do something, but they were just sitting there, motionless, like they were oblivious to what was happening. The man kept getting closer, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to do something, anything, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. He was almost within arm's reach when the train jolted back to life. The doors slammed shut, and we started moving again, throwing me off balance. I stumbled back into my seat, breathing heavily, my eyes fixed on where the man had been standing. But he was gone. Just like that, he had vanished, like he was never there in the first place. I looked around, trying to make sense of it all, but the other passengers were back to their normal selves. The guy was reading his newspaper again, and the woman was typing away on her laptop as if nothing had happened. I sat there, my mind racing, trying to wrap my head around what I had just experienced. It felt like some kind of weird dream, but I knew it wasn't. It was too real, too vivid to be just my imagination. The train continued on, and after what felt like an eternity, we finally pulled into my stop. I didn't waste any time. The moment the doors opened, I was out of there, practically running off the platform. I needed to get away from that train, away from whatever had happened back there. I didn't look back until I was well outside the station, and even then, I half expected to see that man standing there, watching me. But there was nothing, just the train pulling away, heading off into the night. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't get the image of that man out of my head, the way he had looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but it felt too real for that. And the worst part, I never found out what it was, who he was, or why any of it happened. I've taken the train a few times since then, but I always feel this sense of dread whenever I do. Like it could happen again, like I might see him again, and I can't shake the feeling that if I do, I might not be so lucky next time. Alright, so let me tell you about this one time on a train that still freaks me out whenever I think about it. It wasn't late at night or anything. It was actually mid-afternoon. You know, one of those times when you think nothing weird is gonna happen because it's broad daylight. I was heading back home after visiting my cousin in the city. I decided to take the train instead of driving because I thought it would be easier. Less hassle, you know? Just sit back and relax, listen to some music, and let the train do the work. So I get on the train, and it's not too crowded, which is always nice. I found a seat near the window, plugged in my headphones, and started zoning out. A few stops later, the train fills up a bit more, and this guy sits down across the aisle from me. I noticed him because he had this weird vibe, like he was nervous or something. He kept looking around like he was expecting someone or something. I tried not to think much of it. I mean, who hasn't been nervous on public transport, right? As the train continued, I glanced over at him a few times. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just sitting there. But he was fidgeting a lot, like tapping his foot, drumming his fingers on his knee, that kind of thing. I thought maybe he was just anxious or had somewhere important to be. But then I noticed he kept checking the door to the train car, almost like he was waiting for someone to come through it. Every time the door would open at a stop, he'd tense up, and when no one came in, he'd relax a little but still keep looking around. After a while, I started to feel a bit uneasy myself. It was like his nervous energy was rubbing off on me. I tried to go back to my music and ignore him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I took out one of my earbuds just to be more aware of my surroundings. You know how sometimes you just get that gut feeling that you need to be alert? That was what I was feeling. So, we're about halfway to my stop when the train comes to this unexpected halt. We're not near a station, just in the middle of the tracks. Everyone on the train kind of looks around, confused, and there's this murmur of concern. You can feel the shift in the atmosphere, like everyone is silently asking, "What's going on?" The conductor doesn't make an announcement right away, which makes it even more unsettling. I look over at the guy again, and now he looks almost relieved, like he was expecting this to happen. He even gets up from his seat and stands near the door to the train car, just standing there, waiting. That's when I really start to feel uneasy. Why would he look relieved that we're stuck in the middle of nowhere? Minutes go by, and there's still no announcement. People are starting to get restless. I can see others taking out their phones, probably trying to figure out what's going on. I do the same, but of course there's no signal. Typical, right? Stuck on a train in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. Suddenly, the door at the end of the car opens, and this guy in a suit walks in. He looks completely normal, just like another commuter, but the guy who had been sitting across from me stiffens up when he sees him. The suited guy doesn't even glance around. He just walks straight through the car to the other end and goes through the next door, like he's on a mission or something. The nervous guy watches him the whole time, his eyes wide, and as soon as the door closes behind the suited guy, he lets out a breath like he's been holding it the entire time. At this point, I'm really starting to freak out internally. What the hell is going on here? Why is this guy acting like that? And who was the guy in the suit? I try to calm myself down, telling myself I'm just being paranoid. But then the train car goes dead silent. Pin drop silent. It's like everyone in the car has suddenly decided to hold their breath. I look around and everyone is just sitting there, staring straight ahead. No one is talking, no one is moving. It's like they're all frozen or something. The only sound is the faint hum of the train itself, and even that seems quieter than before. I look over at the nervous guy again, and now he's sweating, like really sweating. He's still standing by the door, and his eyes are darting around like he's looking for an escape route. I'm sitting there, my heart pounding, not sure what to do. Should I get up and try to find a conductor? Should I just sit tight and wait it out? Before I can make a decision, the door at the other end of the car opens again, and this time, 2 more guys walk in. They're dressed similarly to the first guy, in suits, looking very official. They walk down the aisle, and I swear, it's like everyone on the train is holding their breath as they pass. They don't look at anyone, just walk straight through to the next car, just like the first guy. Now I'm really freaking out. What the hell is this? Some kind of weird train inspection? Why is everyone acting so strange? The nervous guy is practically shaking at this point. He looks like he's about to bolt, but he doesn't. He just stands there, staring at the door, waiting for something. Then the train starts moving again, just like that, as if nothing happened. No announcement, no explanation, just back to normal. The nervous guy lets out a sigh of relief, but he doesn't go back to his seat. He stays by the door, still looking uneasy but less panicked than before. I'm sitting there, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing adds up. We get to the next station and the doors open. People start getting off, and the nervous guy practically leaps out of the train. I watch him go, and he doesn't look back. He just heads straight for the exit like he can't get away fast enough. I consider getting off myself, but I'm still a couple of stops away from home, so I decide to stay put. The rest of the ride is uneventful, but I can't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I keep thinking about the guys in suits and the way everyone just froze when they walked through. And that nervous guy, what was his deal? Why was he so freaked out? When I finally get to my stop, I'm more than ready to get off the train. I practically sprint out of the station and head home, trying to push the whole experience out of my mind. But it sticks with me, you know? It's like this weird, unsettling feeling that I can't shake. I told a couple of friends about it later, and they all had different theories. Some said it was probably just a coincidence, maybe some undercover cops or something. Others thought it was something more sinister, like some kind of organized crime thing. I don't know. All I know is that it felt wrong, like I was in the middle of something I wasn't supposed to see. I still take the train now and then, but every time I do, I can't help but feel a little on edge. I keep an eye on the other passengers, looking for anything out of the ordinary. I don't know if I'll ever figure out what really happened that day, but I've learned one thing for sure. Trust your gut. When something doesn't feel right, there's probably a reason for it. Alright, this is something that still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. It happened a couple of years ago when I was taking an overnight train to visit a friend in another city. I figured taking the train would be a good idea. Relax, maybe catch some sleep, and not have to worry about driving. But this ride turned out to be anything but relaxing. I got to the station around 9 p.m. It was one of those older stations, not very busy, especially that late at night. There was this eerie quietness, only a handful of people scattered around, waiting for the same train. I bought a coffee from a vending machine, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. You know how sometimes you get that weird sense that something's not quite right? I had that feeling, but I ignored it. When the train finally arrived, I noticed it was pretty old, one of those models from the 80s, with dim lighting and worn out seats. I stepped on and found my seat in the middle of the car. It wasn't too crowded, maybe 10 or 12 people in the entire car, and everyone seemed to be keeping to themselves. I shrugged it off, thinking it would make for a peaceful journey. I put on my headphones, leaned back, and tried to settle in. About an hour into the ride, I started feeling this weird vibe. I can't really explain it, but it was like the air got heavier or something. I took off my headphones and looked around. Most people were either sleeping or staring out the window, except for this one guy sitting a few rows ahead of me. He was staring straight ahead, not moving, not blinking, just staring. He was wearing a dark jacket and a cap, and something about him just felt off. But I told myself I was being paranoid and put my headphones back on. I decided to go to the dining car, hoping to shake off that weird feeling. As I walked through the train, I noticed how empty it was. Every car I passed through had only a couple of people in it, and they all had this blank, distant look on their faces. No one was talking, no one was moving around. It was just quiet, too quiet. When I got to the dining car, there was no one there except the attendant, who was wiping down the counter. He glanced up at me with this expressionless face, like he was looking right through me. I asked for a bottle of water, and he handed it to me without saying a word. I paid and quickly left, feeling more uneasy than before. On my way back to my seat, I noticed something strange. That guy who had been sitting a few rows ahead of me was now in the car I had just passed through, sitting in a seat near the door. I hadn't heard him move, hadn't seen him walk past me, but there he was, just sitting there, staring straight ahead again. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he got up and moved seats while I was in the dining car. I got back to my seat and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The train felt like it was moving slower, and the sound of the wheels on the tracks was almost hypnotic. I tried to distract myself with my phone, but there was no signal. I couldn't even connect to the train's Wi-Fi. It was like being cut off from the world. Another hour passed, and that's when things got really weird. The lights in the car started flickering, just a little at first, then more frequently. I looked around, and the few other passengers didn't seem to notice or care. They were all just sitting there, staring straight ahead like zombies. The air felt colder, and I could see my breath in front of me. It didn't make sense. It was a summer night, and the train had been warm just a while ago. Then the train came to a sudden stop. Not a gradual slowing down, but a jarring, abrupt halt that threw me forward in my seat. I heard the screech of the brakes, the sound echoing through the empty cars, and then silence. No announcement, no conductor coming over the intercom to explain what was happening. Just dead silence. I looked out the window, but it was pitch black outside. We were in the middle of nowhere. No lights, no signs of life. I turned around to see if anyone else was reacting, but they were all still sitting there, staring straight ahead. Even the guy with the cap. It was like they were frozen in place. Panic started to set in. I got up and made my way to the front of the car, thinking I'd find a conductor or someone who could tell me what was going on. But as I opened the door to the next car, I was met with more silence and emptiness. I walked through car after car, all identical, all with those same blank-faced passengers. It was like I was trapped in some sort of loop. I finally reached the front of the train, the conductor's cabin. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I banged on the door, calling out, but nothing. It was like the entire train was abandoned. I started to head back to my seat, but then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the car behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. The footsteps kept getting closer, echoing through the empty car. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do, where to go. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the train started moving again. The lights flickered back on, and the footsteps stopped. I stood there, frozen, trying to catch my breath. I made my way back to my seat, my mind racing with questions. What the hell was happening? Was I dreaming? I pinched myself, but the pain was real. This was happening. I sat down, trying to calm myself, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The guy with the cap was now sitting directly across from me. his eyes locked onto mine. He wasn't staring blankly anymore. He was looking right at me with this unsettling, almost predatory look. I wanted to get up, to run, but I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine, and whispered something I couldn't make out. His voice was low, almost a growl, and it sent chills down my spine. I tried to ask him what he wanted, but my voice wouldn't come out. I was trapped in that moment, frozen in fear. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The train pulled into a station, the doors opened, and people started getting off like nothing had happened. The guy across from me stood up, tipped his cap, and walked away. I watched him go, my body still numb with fear. I didn't move until the train was almost empty. Then I grabbed my things and ran off, not looking back. I don't know what happened on that train. I don't know if it was all in my head, if I imagined the whole thing, or if there was something else going on. But I can tell you this, I've never felt fear like that in my life. It was like being trapped in a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. Since that night, I haven't been able to take a train without feeling that same sense of dread. Every time I hear the sound of the wheels on the tracks, I'm taken back to that moment, to those footsteps, to that guy in the cap. I keep telling myself it was just a bad dream, but deep down, I know it wasn't. It was real, and it's something I'll never forget.